Have you ever seen the movie We're the Millers with that carnival kid with the sweet tattoo? Now regrets, not even one single letter.
Yeah.
Well, you're in luck because today's episode, we're talking about which regrets can you live with? This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
Danny, I was reading and or listening to this somewhere, and it struck me that, in life, no matter what you do, you're going to have regrets, and it all comes down to figuring out which ones can you actually live with.
Yeah, well, this is the interesting thing, right? Because I think you see, this is one of the things so many philosophers talk about, especially the existentialists, right? With authenticity is like starting to live essentially so that you don't have them, right? So your choices, you're recognizing the import of your choices and choosing correctly for yourself, so you're doing what aligns with you. But I think for most of us, right, we're probably not thinking of our choices that way. So, there's always that. And I think there's the other tough thing about being human is like that counterfactual. We can imagine like what would have happened if I had done otherwise. And I think that's a hard thing to live with. The knowledge that like things could be different. I think that's where other animals probably don't struggle with consciousness, right? They don't think about these things. So it's like they don't have to worry about it.
You're not
It's like it
seeing
is
that
what it is.
dolphin being like, "Oh, shucks, if only I would have swam the other direction."
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the that's the interesting thing. They don't seem to. I think that's our fundamental like stumbling block in a sense is like that we can imagine different alternatives, and that we can therefore regret them because a lot of times too we don't know that the thing would have turned like when we regret stuff we don't know that it would have turned out the way we think it would have in our head. We're usually imagining something, like oh if only I had talked to them at that time, if only I had done X Y Z. It's like well it might not have made a difference, you
And
know.
isn't it interesting how in hindsight you can kind of see how like everything works out? But during the time, you're like, no, why?
No, I know. It is funny too, and it's like, and half the time too, it's like common sense stuff. It's like that you just don't see for whatever reason when you're doing something. It's really weird.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But I thought this was really interesting because, like, up until that point, the point where I heard this thing, which regrets can you live with? I was thinking I was like the dude from Where the Millers, like, nah regrets. Like, just, I sat down, I figured out my values, I figured out what's important to me, and I'm just living a life of nah regrets, not even a single letter.
no, no, none.
And, but it turns out, after thinking about it a bit, like no matter what you do, there's going to be regrets. Like for instance, okay, so like we're doing a whole bunch of stuff with technology, programming, development, all that stuff. And there's just so much out there. Like there's a billion different directions you can go. And for every direction, there's way more information than you can consume in your entire lifetime. And so like it's really hard sticking to one direction because I
Um,
just like there's all this different stuff that I want to do and it's hard because as I stay on this one course that I know is the course that I want to stay on, there's all these other like things that are just flashing, being like, come on, do this, you're gonna miss out
yeah,
on this, you're not doing this. And it's
no.
frustrating.
I've had that experience my whole life though. I remember in college, dude, being like, I have to pick one major. Like I can't just like, because like I was interested in science, I was interested in math, I was interested in philosophy, I was interested in English, all. I wasn't not like none of them didn't interest me. And I thought like because you don't have any life experience either, I was like, any of those could be viable. I don't know, who knows? Like
Yeah,
and
I
like
know.
it is really hard because I think that's, it's interesting too, because I think about that sometimes, like back in the day, like, and I think of Aristotle a lot because he wrote so much, he was so perfect, and he also like was the at the forefront of so many different fields because like you could be like a learned person back then and know almost everything that
There
what I
were
mean,
only
like
like five
beyond
other learned people on the face of the planet.
yeah, like like there wasn't it wasn't like this. I don't want to say like factory mentality of producing that, but like education wasn't democratic and spread out in the way that it is now. And so I think like there was less people, and I think it's interesting because like now like yeah, you try and study any discipline, there's it's so many people working on it that it moves so fast that there's just so much if you look at the amount of number of journal articles published every year in any field, it's insane. Like and presumably that's all new knowledge or, interesting takes on something.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
in going with it, like in kind of thinking about it, like which regrets can I live with? Is Yeah, it's tricky because there are some things in order to live a life that's kind of meaningful to yourself and that's aligned with your values, you're gonna have to not do stuff and not doing stuff. Like it all these people, like freaking Seven Habits of Highly Retarded People. Okay, my favorite book out there. So like he this thing that he has in there, he's like, he goes to his classroom with some sand and some gravel and some small stones and some big rocks in a jar. And he's like, can you students figure out how to fit all this stuff in there? And the students are just geniuses. And so they dump the sand in first and then the gravel and then the little stone. And then there's no room for the big stones. And they're like, geez, can't solve this one. Well, then he's like, oh no, all you had to do is put in the big stones first and then fit the rest of the stuff in there. But like it's a bunch of BS because there's more big stones than will actually fit in the jar. And I feel like that's where I've gotten to in life, where there's more big stones than actually fit in the jar. And it's really, really difficult to figure out what to actually put in a jar.
Yeah. And we've only been really focusing on like things that you can learn, like stuff. We haven't even talked about like people, relationships, all of that other stuff that can like get in that becomes regret, things that you can regret too, or opportunities to regret too. It's like, yeah, it is weird. It's like every choice is a chance for, a potential counterfactual and then a chance to regret. It's crazy and it's really hard because well, we said it 100 times, right? You can do anything, but you can't do everything, right? You have to make those choices. And then you have to live with it and I think this is the other hard thing. In order to get good at anything, or in order to like cultivate a good relationship, in order to, anything that's going to be valuable takes time and energy and effort. And, cultivation it's never going to be fast, and I think this is one of the other difficult things about it is, when you make these choices, you're also like have to build something up. And so you see, you can kind of keep ruminating on what was, lost maybe.
Yeah, that whole thing about it taking time, like I constantly need to remind myself that because, even though I've been at it for years now, it's still like in its infancy. And I'm reading this book right now by a guy who's arguably younger than me. And he's been doing this stuff on like nationally competitive teams for 8 years and like all this different stuff. And I'm just getting like green with envy reading the book. And I'm just like,
Yeah, but
okay,
he's been on
calm
nationally
down.
competitive teams for 8 years, which means he's been doing it professionally for 8 years, which means he spent a lot more time doing it before. I think that's
Yeah.
the other hard thing, I think that's the other problem with regret is we tend to we compare ourselves to people that are way further along, and it's like just not a fair comparison. It really isn't. Like you wouldn't compare, I don't know, you wouldn't compare the knowledge of a college senior with a fourth grader. Like that makes no sense. And then be like, well, you're an idiot, fourth grader, because you don't know all this stuff. Like that just wouldn't make any sense. Like it'd be, but you could
Just
compare the
give
fourth
up
grader to
now,
other,
fourth grade.
yeah, right? You can compare them to other fourth graders, I guess, but even
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is really hard.
Hmm. Well, yeah,
Here's what,
like
I don't know. Oh, go ahead. What do you
I
say?
can like I can see it's very easy for me to make the connection with money because like you think about these giants who have a ton of money, like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and all these guys, and it's like, yeah, they may have billions of dollars, but how many meals can they eat in a day? You know? It's
Hmm?
like there's just a limit on how much enjoyment you can get from life with money, and that's very, very clear. But it's like I always get ahead of myself with like wanting to accomplish stuff faster than the natural process.
I think we all do, right? Because you want to, yeah, I always find that to be, at least with myself, it's like you can imagine where you want to be clearly, right? And you just want to get there. Like, because we take on a new task or something, and we think, oh, it's going to be so good, when I'm there and this, and whatever. And so we want to just be there now. And, it's hard especially when you're self-pacing, because there's nobody putting limits on or telling you what's good progress. So you just, it's just however much you can do. I think that's also
Hmm.
part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also the other side of the coin is actually looking at things that you regret right now and then figuring out a way to be okay with it.
Yeah. That's also a good one too.
Hmm.
Dealing with that stuff now. Well, if you don't deal with them now too, they're only going to get worse too, probably, right? I imagine.
Yeah. Like it's stuff that you regret now. Like I just had an experience with going to the boot camp that I did for studying for this exam, where like
Yeah.
clearly I should have never done the boot camp because I was not far enough ahead to be able to make that useful to be able to take the exam and pass it. Like I just took a practice exam and it was a 24-hour exam and let's just say that based on that I wouldn't be passing. But uh it was just
Never know
like
though.
yeah, it was just really frustrating because like I put
Yeah.
in, you know, so far at this point like 10 weeks of like extremely hard work. After working at this stuff for like a year, year and a half, I put in like 10 weeks of extremely hard work. And I feel like I was misled, but that was my own fault for putting myself in that situation. And
I'm believing in their advertising.
yeah, so yeah, I know. So for a while, I know that's why you can't trust anybody. Like that was the episode the other
You
week.
can't. You
You can't
really
trust
can't, dude.
anybody.
No.
And so it like I got to a point where for a few days, maybe even for a week, I was just like really, really angry and I regretted doing it. And I was like, this was a waste of time. This was a waste of money. This was a waste of resources. Like now I'm pissed off because of all this. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, fine. Well, it happened. So, what can I learn from it? How can
Yeah, but
I?
that doesn't even make any sense though, because you want to take it anyway. So you did, I mean, regardless of whether you passed this time, you said most people have to take it more than once anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like
But
it's
I
not
didn't
an
want to be
easy
most people.
exam. I didn't want to. I know that. I thought I was different, but I assumed I was different. Yeah, I mean, we never think it's gonna happen to us. But I mean, like, you said most people take it more than once, and you still put a ton of time in, so you still learned a lot. I know you did because I mean, you were
Hmm.
talking about it, so I know you learned a lot. So it wasn't like worthless. I think that's the
Yeah.
other problem too. A lot of times we regret things because maybe we were sold,
Hmm.
something would happen and it doesn't happen. But we
Yeah.
then we don't look back at like what we actually did accomplish. I think that's our big problem is we're so goal and result oriented rather than like looking at the process and the journey that we totally forget about it when it
Hmm.
comes to evaluation until we undervalue what we actually did.
True. That is quite possible. Like I know I've learned a lot from it, but unfortunately it's at this point it's not enough to pass. The other thing is like knowing what I know
Mm.
now. Like here's one of the other parts that I regret, but it's kind of like stupid because I'm like knowing what I know now, I wish I could have gone back and told myself do this, 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 and this first before you ever consider doing that boot camp or
Yeah, no
signing up for the
shit.
exam.
I mean,
But it's like I didn't know that back then. And even if I did know, like I remember back when I was going to be a veterinarian and like everybody around me was like, "Oh, you loved animals as a kid. You should be a veterinarian." So I was a young, stupid person,
yeah,
and I was like, "Okay, fine.
impressionable little guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll go a
yeah.
couple $100,000 into debt and become a veterinarian. Why not?" And
I have no other viable ideas. Why not do veterinarian?
yeah, but like every sign beforehand was like literally you had to get vet experience before you did this. And every vet clinic I worked at, I would quit after like a couple of weeks because I didn't enjoy doing it. And every vet I talked with, they were like, "Don't do it. It's the worst thing you could possibly do. You're going to be in so much debt." And I was like, "Yeah, but that doesn't affect me. Like I'll make some money and
I'm
whatever."
different.
Yeah, I know exactly. And so, yeah, even if I knew what I knew now and I would be telling myself back then, I probably wouldn't have listened anyways.
That's the funny thing. Yeah, it's always funny when people are like, if I if it know what I know now, it's like, well, yeah. I mean, of course you would have done things differently. You
Hmm.
have all this lived experience and time. Like, yeah, I mean, that's just a silly thing to say in a way. It's fun. I think that's one of the things I always really appreciated about like Camus and Nietzsche and stuff was that when you see the world as fundamentally meaningless and that we create meaning, you also realize that like because we create meaning, none of it really matters. It only matters in so much as it matters to you. And so I think it can be very freeing because it's like, at the end of the day, no matter what we do, no matter what we build, we all go to the same place. We take nothing with us.
That's
Nobody's going to
heaven, right?
remember us.
Surrounded by
Sure.
dozens of
Yeah.
virgins.
If that's what you want. But if that makes you feel better, I guess. But like, it's funny because we don't, you know, it's like there's nothing's gonna happen afterwards. Nobody's gonna remember us. Even if they do remember us, we're not gonna know that they remember us. Even if we do leave some sort of legacy, we don't know how it's gonna be interpreted later or how long it's gonna last. Like, I think about Steve Jobs a lot because, right after he died, that book came out everybody saw he was kind of an ass and all. We all knew that. And then you don't hear about him really anymore at all. It was a big deal. And it's like, and give it a little more time, and he'll be, nobody will even really think about him. They'll talk about him in reference to maybe, Apple and stuff here and there, but that's about it. Like, it's not like there's going to be this huge, I don't know, statues to him and stuff everywhere and all this. And even if there were, who cares? Because it doesn't affect him
Yeah.
like at all.
And it's interesting too because like there was another creator of Apple too, Wozniak, and nobody talks about him. And then like, suppose in the future there's another CEO or somebody who's a very huge visionary for Apple, they create some brand new thing, and that's like the new direction of Apple. Everybody will be talking about him instead of Jobs, and he'll be a thing of
Or
the
there could be
past.
there could be new technology or a new company where all this crap becomes obsolete and there
Hmm.
is no app. I mean, that's also possible.
Hmm.
Sun could explode or eventually will. I mean,
Yeah.
like when you think about it, and I think it's putting things into perspective sometimes. Like, was it really that big of a deal? Is it really worth regretting?
Yeah. That's a
Is it
good
even
point.
worth going back to?
That's a good point. That's why I love reading science fiction. Every time they talk about all the
I know.
stars and everything and all the nothing between them, it always blows my mind. And I'm just like, oh my
Oh,
goodness.
dude, I know. I read it all the time. I love it because it really does put things in perspective. It's like it's funny how self-important we are for how insignificant we are and how insignificant our impact is. Like we have no impact like, yeah, we might be affecting, with climate change and stuff, we're affecting the Earth, but we have no impact beyond that. Nothing.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's really, when you think about it, it's interesting. Like the universe is so huge. So like, we're so self-important, so self-centered. And I think
Hmm.
that's also maybe part of it is that we're, very, um, we love to sort of inflate our importance because that makes us feel like this has more value or meaning than and it's easier maybe to stomach life. I don't know.
Yeah. That is interesting. It reminded me of this part I read in Tao Te Ching this morning about how like don't worry about the earth. The earth is always in a state of falling apart. And I was just like, hang on, they wrote this back then. And it's just like it's so true now because it gives us like a feeling of importance. Like we have to do something to save the earth, like all
Yeah.
that stuff. And it's like, oh, that makes us feel important. But really, the Earth is going to outlast humans by a long time. Like it outlasted
Yeah.
dinosaurs, it outlasted ice ages, outlasted everything else. Humans will just be another thing.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. Dowsing's another one, right? Where like the emphasis is not on worrying because we can't control this stuff. We can't, and the meanings we place on things are not necessarily the end all be all and what they mean or matter. And I think that's an interesting work too, because he was writing when he wrote that book, like China was a mess. That was like the Warring States period. They were like just, it was total. I mean, that's why what Taoism and a bunch of other, schools of thought developed to try and like because they realized like things are falling apart. We need to like get some sort of harmony or we're just gonna destroy ourselves. So it's kind of interesting when you think about it, like that they were able to come up with this idea then is very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Maybe we,
anything else you're gonna regret?
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder too if it's even, you know, we always talk about like going back and like, digging up these things that happened in our past and working through them and all. And I do wonder sometimes if like some stuff if it's not even worth doing. Or maybe it's better not to, just to let it be. If that makes sense. I don't
Hmm.
know. Yeah, regrets are tough. I mean, I'd like to say I don't have any regrets right now, but that's probably not true. I'm sure I do if I really, really thought about it. Like, there's always something. And I think it is hard because every choice you make, I mean, there's that little like possibility that the other alternative would have been better.
I hate when I buy
But I think,
something and I regret it. Like that's the
well,
worst
buyer's
feeling
remorse is like
ever.
that's like the biggest one,
Dude, that's the worst one because you spend like, and that happens so often nowadays because there's so much crap out there. And it's like you buy it
Yeah.
and it's a total disappointment. And then, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I don't even buy that much stuff anymore because it's like half of it is just a letdown. It's
Hmm.
terrible. And but I think that's basically what it is, right? We get our hopes up and expect something, and then it falls below our expectations. So maybe that's it too. Just temper your expectations. You know, don't expect the world, expect something reasonable.
Oh, yeah. Should get a tattoo on my chest, not expectations.
Yeah, not expectations.
Expectations. Something like that.
Exact actions. Just get rid of them. Maybe that's it too, though. I think it is expectations get in the way. Yeah. I mean, ideally trying to like it is hard to live in no regrets, but trying to like be grateful, gratitude's helpful.
And
You know,
probably
thinking about your
choosing the regrets you're gonna have, like as best in your ability.
yeah, I mean, being thoughtful in your choices, right? Choosing things that are for you, not letting like, social pressures, obligations and stuff dictate your choices. You're probably less likely to have regrets, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Sweet. So there you have it. By the end of this episode, you should have nah regrets, not even a letter.
Nah, none.
What was his name? Scotty P or something like
I think something. I
that.
can't remember.
Anyways,
I
if
haven't seen
you,
that movie in forever.
I know I gotta watch it again. Uh, if you enjoyed this episode, like, share, subscribe, watch us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Hey, Randy.